So I'll tell you something. Somebody said to me, Alina, would you rather be smart or pretty? And I said, oh, easy. Pretty. I can fake being smart.
No, I don't think you can. Republican conservatives have consistently shown that they don't even know how to do that. Remember when Sarah Palin tried to fake being smart? Palin was popularly regarded as pretty.
Don't refer to me as a MILF.
But we were all cringing in her interview with Katie Couric. What a train wreck that was. Sarah Palin tried really hard to sound smart, but all we heard was,
I'm so stupid, duh!
When you're pretty, there is no need to fake being smart, because smart doesn't sell in this culture, I'm sorry to say. Some people, when they're pretty, actually play stupid instead. I'm guilty of that too. I'm sure that when a younger audience looks at me and sees, Skarsgård's version of Nosferatu, it's probably hard for them to understand that 30 or 40 years ago, I was pretty. And until that time, there was no need for me to be smart. In fact, I realized early on that being a factually accurate intellectual is more likely to get you into fights, or at least arguments, on almost everyone you meet. But hey, man, when you live in SoCal in the 70s, if you're always more fun when you're dumb, so...
Y'all are all woohoo and shit.
Such is youth. So in order to ensure the kind of meaningless momentary liaisons that mattered most to a 20-something in the 1980s, I found that it was better to play stupid. And that way, all anyone ever expected of me was the one thing I was there for. When I grew up and got tired of being hedonistic and irresponsible, I dropped the veil and started talking intelligently about art, history, science, and so on. And then I either got fired right away or I was quickly promoted to management. And while being pretty shouldn't matter as much as it does, and being smart should be more important than it is, especially in politics, I'm sorry to say that it's not even necessary. Not anymore. We didn't just lower the bar, we dropped it to the floor. We have no standards anymore. When I was a kid, I spent most of my childhood in Southern California. We lived all around LA in the 1970s. I remember the common stereotype back then, that if you heard of someone who was both pretty and stupid, you would expect that they were probably blonde. That was the expectation around Hollywood back then. And now we have Lauren Boebert to disprove that. She's not blonde. What she is, a completely unqualified religious fool who has no idea what the Constitution says or means.
The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
That woman needs to take a history class.
Imagine being Lauren Boebert and regularly embarrassing yourself on the world stage, but being too stupid to realize that that's what you're doing. Being that dumb would be like being permanently drunk and thinking you're sober because you've never been sober, so you don't even know what it's like. Conversely, if you heard about someone who was blonde and also stupid, then you would expect them to be pretty. But Marjorie Taylor Greene disproves that. Remember that this is the woman who, among other things, repeatedly said that Jewish Democrats secretly have the technological power to control the weather and somehow manipulate hurricanes to attack Republican areas and thus influence elections. Both Greene and Boebert somehow got elected to public office, despite how stunningly stupid they are. In fact, both of them got re-elected, which shows how stupid we are. All three branches of federal government are now dripping with stupidity, as the dumbest people ever keep getting elected or positioned. We have a few good people in Congress, but very few that are as smart as they need to be for that job. With most of the good ones, it's more a matter of having a good heart than having a good mind, while the overwhelming majority have black hearts and dead brains, and their constituents are somehow even worse. It's like living in a zombie apocalypse. I would pray and say, God help us all, but I already know that if there was a God, we wouldn't even be in this situation. I don't know what we can do about that now. Honestly, I weep for humanity anymore. It seems that over half our country is suffering from some sort of stupor. And have you noticed that the worst of all intolerant, ignorant bigotry and hypocrisy anymore always seems to be connected to some religious faith. It's as if religion causes stupidity. It certainly has special appeal to the insane. It's not just politicians either. It's everyone, everywhere, made worse by the media, with idiot celebrities and also political pundits. For example, take a look at Candace Owens.
It's interesting, the conspiracies that we've been talking about so far, there's a lot of incentive structures, like reasons that the government would want to push these narratives for their own benefit. But one that you talked about, and you haven't gone into it too much in depth, but you don't believe dinosaurs are real.
So this is a funny one. So this is one of the ones where I'm like, I'm not kidding. This conversation happened and it was so funny. I was just walking with Savannah, my manager, because we do like these little evening walks. And I just looked up to her and I was like, dinosaurs, that seems pretty fake and gay. She's like, Savannah's from Tennessee. She's like, I've never believed in dinosaurs. Like literally, everyone thinks there's like some conspiracy behind it. I was like, that was how it started.
Dinosaurs are fake and gay. That turkey you had for Thanksgiving, was that fake? Was it also a homosexual turkey? Even if it was a turducken, which I guess would be technically fake, and maybe even gay, it would still be 3 real dinosaurs. I realize that most of the ignorant laity doesn't understand that birds are literally dinosaurs. Instead, many of the mouth-breathing know-nothings think that plesiosaurs, mosasaurs, pterosaurs, dimetrodon, and glyptodonts are all dinosaurs, when they're not. None of those are. So I'm wasting my time trying to explain what a dinosaur is, especially to someone who doesn't care what reality is. I did not watch the rest of this interview. I had hints about how awful the rest of it was, and I just can't sit through all that. I caught part of it, and I find it disturbing not only that people can be that stupid, but that they don't look into anything they say. They don't care whether whatever they said is right or wrong. I would think that if you said something that was factually false and you broadcast that out over public media for all to hear, that you would lose credibility and that you would have to come back and apologize for not having adequately analyzed your ignorant opinion before you expressed it as if it was a fact. I remember when Dan Quayle effectively ended his political career just because he once misspelled the word potatoes. But now, we're so much more dumb than that. Dumber than we've ever been. Not only do we live in a world where half the population is indefensibly stupid, but they regularly lie about everything, too. They don't fact-check themselves because they don't care what the truth is. They'd rather just talk out of their asses, expressing thoughtless and witless opinions as if it was all a matter of certain fact, just because they said so. I couldn't even listen to the rest of this insane video. I only want to comment on the 6.5-minute segment where she talks about dinosaurs and evolution. I feel I need to make this video because I am probably uniquely qualified to speak on every topic she brings up in that segment. And I don't think anyone else can or will address all of this part appropriately.
And I was like, what on earth? I'm like, it's funny because people will literally say they don't believe in God, but then tell them like dinosaurs aren't real and they fall apart. Like, I'm like, okay, so they're just roaming the planet.
Yeah. When reasonable people can easily find, test, and analyze an overwhelming preponderance of evidence beyond reasonable doubt from many independent sources, when we can just pick it up out in the world and hold it in our hands and know that it's real, then yeah, we're more likely to accept that over empty assertions of impossible absurdity that can never be tested or evidenced in any reliable way, and that are logically invalid and evidently false, but that we're told that we're just supposed to believe completely without question or reservation or reason just because some dishonest moron told us to. Someone who clearly doesn't know what they're even talking about. Reasonable people can be funny that way, and we would rather accept what is demonstrably true over what is obviously only imaginary.
And I was like, that's really interesting. But then, because I got into and very much subscribe and believe and know to be true that there is a Christ conspiracy that's happening right now, which is the intentional removal of Christ because they want people not to believe in God, but instead to believe in humans.
Well, to be fair, we can prove that humans are real, so we don't have to believe in them. However, after listening to this interview and seeing our disintegrating political situation as well, I don't think I do believe in humanity anymore. It turns out we are not Homo sapiens after all. We are clearly not the wise man that we declared our species to be. But there is no Christ conspiracy. So no, you don't know that to be true because I know that it's not true. Stop pretending to know things you don't know. Whether you believe in God or not is irrelevant. Nearly all of the pioneers of evolutionary theory were Christians, and many of its modern champions still are. So the issue is not whether you were fool enough to buy into some particular set of religious mythology, but whether you accept scientific data or whether you will foolishly believe whatever fairy tales you were told to believe just because some know-nothing priest or pastor told you to believe it.
Because they want people not to believe in God, but instead to believe in humans. Well, that is what evolutionary theory was about.
No. Evolution is the one and only explanation, scientific or otherwise, for biodiversity, which the Bible does not even begin to address, except where God says to, let the earth bring forth the living creatures after their kind. That matches evolutionary phylogenetics fairly well. Everything else, the Bible got wrong, because it's just a bunch of tall tales made up by mere fallible men who obviously had no idea what they were talking about, ever. Evolution is a verifiable fact of population genetics, but the stories in the Bible are merely fables with a moral, literally fairy tales, with magical enchantments, giants and witches and animals that talk and act like people. That's what a fairy tale is. Now, those stories may have symbolic meaning, but they are not literally true. Even Bible scholars, as well as Christian biologists and geologists, are likely to admit that much of Genesis is essentially just folklore rather than fact. Christian and rabbinical scholars of history are both likely to admit that there was never an Adam and Eve, no global flood of Noah's Ark, and the Exodus didn't happen the way the Bible describes it either. Historians tell me that they've given up on Moses ever being a real person. So the real issue is whether you will consider verifiable truth that you can test for yourself, or whether you would rather reject reality to make believe impossible nonsense for no good reason, based on fallacious argument from authority rather than actual factual evidence.
Because rather than making human beings believe that they had a creator, there was no concept of a dinosaur until 1850. That's very recent.
Actually, the first fossils identified to be dinosaurs were the teeth of an iguanodon found in 1822. Then, being the first guy to know what he is looking for, that same guy found an ankylosaur in 1832. Then a Christian creationist, who also happened to be the world's leading expert on paleontology at that time, Sir Richard Owen, coined the word dinosaur in 1842. Beyond that, why would you want to make someone believe something that is not evidently true, so that you can't show the truth of it to even know whether it is true? Why would you tell someone it's true if you don't even know if it is? Merely believing something is not the same thing as knowing it. Knowledge differs from mere belief in that knowledge is demonstrable, testable, with measurable accuracy. You can show what you know. But if you can't show it, then you don't know it, and you shouldn't act like you do. When you assert baseless speculation as if it was a matter of fact, you may call it revealed truth, but we call that lying.
Right? That's the first time they were like, we actually think that there were these reptiles that are roaming the planet. And then within that same decade, they were like, dinosaur bones. And they started finding them everywhere. I'm like, okay, so nobody found this. And then
Really?
Suddenly there's entire museums and...
Other dinosaur fossils had been found prior to that, of course, but not recognized as such. The earliest fossil ever eventually identified to be a dinosaur was found in a limestone quarry in 1676. For centuries, that fossil was declared to be the scrotum of a giant that had been turned to stone. It turned out to be the top part of a thigh bone of a megalosaurus. In the 17th century, it was easy enough to believe in giants being turned to stone, but it was impossible to imagine a theropod dinosaur. Likewise, some people found the skull of a mammoth and mistook it for Cyclops. They didn't have elephants in that area, so that when they saw the big hole in the front of the skull where the trunk goes, they thought that was the site of a giant eyeball. Most earlier fossil discoveries were of seashells or of the random bones of smaller animals believed to have been petrified by the gaze of a basilisk or a gorgon. And people didn't begin to figure out fossils until 1764, when the mostly complete skull of a mosasaur was found buried 90 feet deep in a Dutch quarry. Mosasaurs are not dinosaurs, but rather giant marine lizards. Europeans at that time noted the fact that no one had ever seen anything like this alive anywhere in the world, but especially not in Europe. Holland was not famous for hosting giant carnivorous tropical lizards as big as a whale. But if these still existed at all anywhere, Then, with the whaling industry and global travel that was beginning at that time, in the late 1700s, and if these things were still real at all, someone would have seen them by now. We'd have some kind of documentation for them, but nothing. This is when people began to realize the concept of extinction. That fossil was seized by Napoleon and brought to one of his own experts, Georges Cuvier, who was already compiling a study of fossils. In 1796, Cuvier wrote, "What has become of these two enormous animals, the mammoth and the mastodon, of which one no longer finds any living traces, and so many others of which remains are found everywhere on Earth, and of which perhaps none still exist? The fossil rhinoceros of Siberia are very different from all known rhinoceros. It is the same with the alleged fossil bears of Ansbach, the fossil crocodile of Maastricht, the species of deer from the same locality, the 12-foot-long animal with no incisor teeth and with clawed digits, of which the skeleton has just been found in Paraguay. None has any living analogue. Why, lastly, does one find no petrified human bone? All these facts, consistent among themselves and not opposed by any report, seem to me to prove the existence of a world previous to ours, destroyed by some kind of catastrophe." With this realization, Georges Cuvier secured his position as the father of paleontology. All these other fossils were already known several decades before the first correctly identified dinosaur discovery.
In China, they have actually been caught manufacturing dinosaur bones many times over.
I think what Candace is referring to here is the case of Stephen Zirkus. He was a paleo artist, and quite a good one, but he was not a paleontologist. He was not a scientist. I called him once to say that I was coming to his museum in Blanding, Utah, and that I wanted to meet him, being a fan of his super realistic, lifelike renderings. I mean, they were excellent, but he ducked out that day, choosing to avoid me. I later found out it was because he believed in the ridiculous notion that feathered dinosaurs had evolved from birds rather than the obvious other way around. Why would anyone believe something so stupid? It seems that when you publicly doubt whatever mainstream science plainly shows, like denying avian evolution or denying the moon landing or the Holocaust, or when you pretend to believe that the Earth is flat, ignorant people think that makes them special somehow, like they're the privileged few who know the untold truth, when really they're just compensating because they don't really understand anything. Anyway, the Liaoning province of China has a fantastic fossil site, probably the best in the world. It's not water-based fossils like most other sites. This one was caused by an ashfall during the early Cretaceous period, because most of these animals were buried alive under tons and tons of very fine volcanic ash. Many of these fossils are still articulated, and the detail is extraordinarily fine. They're also relatively easy to find. Crack a few slabs in half, and you might see the impression of an animal therein that is reflected on both sides, left and right. And that means that poor farmers will scour the area looking for whatever they can sell. If they only find fragments that would have been worthless in their own, they might be able to effectively glue them together and sand the outsides equally to make a single fake fossil out of two or more real ones. Thus, there is an illegal fossil trade. Stephen Zirkus went to China and met with smugglers to purchase an illegal fossil of a dino-bird combo that he thought would prove his upside-down view of Paravian evolution. He was so convinced of this that he paid $80,000 for that fossil, and then had experts in America examine it after it was too late. Only a handful of scientists ever saw that fossil, but everyone who did told him that it was a fraudulent compilation. Paleontologist Phil Currie noticed in the initial examination that the left and right feet mirrored each other perfectly, and that the fossil had been completed by using both slab and counterslab with no connection to the tail. Preparator Kevin Ollenbach concluded that the fossil was a composite of at least 3 separate specimens and up to as many as 5. Paleontologist Timothy Rao ran CT scans indicating that the bottom fragments, the tail and the lower legs, were not part of the larger fossil. So while the composition of the fossil was fake, the constituent components were all real. It was a composite of real dinosaur fossils that would have been discarded as worthless fragments on their own. And the reason Candace knows about this is because Zirkus suffered from sunk cost fallacy, having spent $80,000 on a forgery. and he convinced the National Geographic that the fossil had been confirmed to be real. And they ran the story, much to their own immediate embarrassment. There's a bit more to that story, too. Chinese paleontologist Zhu Jing recognized on first inspection that the tail belonged to an as yet unnamed feathered dromaeosaur. He returned to China and eventually found a fairly complete microraptor whose tail was the counterslab of the fossil in America. And what's interesting about microraptor is that it was a four-winged feathered gliding dinosaur, an intermediate transition between small dinosaurs like Compsognathus and the famous Archaeopteryx. As such, Microraptor was a transitional species that was as compelling evidence of avian evolution from dinosaurs as Archaeopteryx was in Darwin's day. And it turns out that Zhu Jing gave it the wrong name. The Peruvian dinosaur of this exact description that Beebe had predicted back in 1915 was called Tetrapteryx.
And it is the case that dinosaur bones, for whatever reason, are always just found by the paleontologist. Like, it's not like you and me walking outside. I'm like, hey, a dinosaur bone. And, or by somebody who's related to a paleontologist. It's very strange.
I'm a member of the Dallas Paleontological Society. That's a group of interested people who are not all professional scientists, but who take field trips with scientists to fossiliferous areas to see what they can find. Because you have to know where to look, and it usually takes a trained eye to recognize what you're looking for. Lots of cities have groups like this, and anyone can join, even stupid people who want to do their own research, but really do it. On my first paleontological expedition, I spent a couple of weeks in the semi-arid desert portion of the South African Karoo with 10 other guys, all named Professor Blankety-Blank PhD, who were kind enough to treat me like a colleague. And we were in a remote area with no people and little or no vegetation, which is important because the roots of plants will destroy fossils close to the surface. Almost everyone found several fossils every day, except for me and one other guy. It took us 3 days of wandering the desert for 8 hours a day at over 100 degrees, staring at the rocks on the ground, trying to find one with indications that it was once bone. I eventually did find a handful of scattered bones that had been disturbed by wind erosion, including a large piece of femur. The expert with me at that moment immediately found 2 more pieces of it within a 10-foot circle, and they all fit together precisely. However, if the fossil is already eroded out of its protective matrix such that a regular person might be able to recognize that it is a piece of bone, that also means that the fossil itself is eroding now too, and the rest of it is some distance in any direction and may already be destroyed. That was the case with everything I found on that trip. I even found a skull fragment that was blown out on top of the sand by a dust storm or whatever. I had a big enough piece in my hand to recognize that it came from some sort of therapsid, as indicated by the pineal foramen, but I wasn't able to find the rest of the fossil, I'm sorry to say. If I'd found its teeth, then we'd know precisely what it was, and I might have been able to name a new species. The other people on our team were able to pick out a couple black or white spots on an otherwise ordinary bit of rock and recognize portions of an animal therein. They had a CT scanner back at the university that would show fossil inside the rock like looking at an X-ray. Then they have devices that can meticulously remove the matrix around it to remove the rock and reveal a wonderfully detailed fossil inside. Untrained people would never look at what looks like marks on a random rock and realize, these are the tusks of a dinocephalian. That's why Candace Owens never found a fossil. I was given a private tour of the laboratory in back of the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Alberta, Canada, when I got to see a dozen or so techs using these precision tools in a years-long process of extracting fossil bones from the surrounding matrix, or vice versa. The prize of their collection had not yet been published, but it was about to be announced to the world. I got a sneak preview of one of the best preserved fossils ever discovered. It was a mostly complete ankylosaur that had been hauled out of a local quarry, and parts of it were exposed, enough of it that it could be recognized even to the untrained eye. The rest of it had to be hauled to the lab on a heavy truck and then carefully extracted millimeter by millimeter over the next few years. The detail on this fossil was amazing, best I've ever seen. There was even a skin impression over the thing, revealing that much of this ankylosaur was leather-clad, like the skin of an alligator. Just beautiful. Although it is very rare there are times when one of the 8 billion people on our planet will see enough of a fossil to recognize it, and even if they have no training at all. I remember a news story about a school bus driver in my neighborhood who wandered down to the local creek after a major storm. The heavy rain had collapsed a bit of cliffside, revealing parts of a fossil mosasaur. And the funny thing about that was that this guy was a young Earth creationist who, like Candace, didn't believe in dinosaurs. He didn't believe in deep time either. Yet here he is, the first human ever to lay eyes on this 80-some-odd million-year-old fossil. And it's on his land, so he knows it's not fake. No one put that there. It had obviously always been there. All he could see was the easiest thing to recognize, the regularly repeating pattern of a row of teeth in a jaw. And wisely, he realized that there was probably more of it that he could not see, so he contacted the Dallas Museum of Natural History.
All right, imagine a sea monster as big as a dart bus with a mouthful of giant teeth that can devour its prey in one fast gulp. It sounds a whole lot like a scene out of Jurassic Park, but it's a description of a mosasaur, an 82-million-year-old serpent found along Duck Creek in Garland. It's a story we first told you about more than 4 years ago. Tonight, Channel 8's Steve Stoller shows us the serpent is ready for you to see.
It's tedious work that requires great patience and steady hands. Dallas Paleontological Society volunteers put in thousands of hours, carefully chipping away rock from the ancient bones of a mosasaur.
This would have been about 40 to 45 feet in life, about the size of a bus, would have weighed about 8 tons and could have eaten you in one bite.
This rock is 85 million years old, made up of tiny prehistoric shellfish that fell to the ocean's floor and became the creature's tomb. Separating the reptile from the rock to preserve an important piece of history is painstaking, tedious work.
It takes me over an hour to 2 hours to expose just one of these teeth. At any time, they can pop and fly apart. The bone is extremely fragile. It hasn't been exposed for 83 million years. So when it comes out, it's extremely fragile. A careless slip of an air scribe and you can blow it apart, never to be put back together again.
So I'm not at all surprised that pre-industrial people, living largely in isolation with no system of transportation and no mass communication, went for thousands of years without knowing that there even were any fossil species from ancient times.
Anyways, I don't know for sure.
But you think the incentive structure there is to move away from God?
Well, they want you to believe that God isn't real.
No, we really don't care about that. Although, try to see this from my perspective. Let's say you move to a place where half the people regularly hang garlic around their doors and windows to protect against vampires. The other half of the population take no such precautions, but they never get attacked by vampires. The believers say it happens all the time, although they can never evidence a single instance. The unbelievers are not surprised, saying, yeah, they're just nuts. Then one of your neighbors demands to know why you don't have any garlic around your door. And you say politely that you don't believe in vampires. Then your neighbor gets angry. At first he accuses you of being evil somehow, simply because you're not fool enough to believe the same stupid shit that he does. Then he threatens you, saying that you're going to meet your vampire one day and you will be sorry when you cower before him on that last day. And your neighbor thinks that he's made a valid argument and that you should really be scared by that. But how could you be? So you reply, a bit more sternly this time, that there's no such thing as vampires. Then your neighbors accuse you of being part of a Dracula conspiracy for the intentional removal of Dracula. You say, that's got to be the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my whole life. But then you remember when you heard something just as dumb just last week while listening to Candace Owens' podcast.
That, like, the theory of evolution, like you're an ape. What happened was just over time, like you used to be a little chimpanzee, but then with time, this is why you learned about the theory of evolution, Homo sapien, Australopithecus, but then we were Homo erectus, and now you're a human being.
Actually, Homo erectus was human too. Every species in the genus Homo is human, not just sapiens. We're also apes, though, too. Look it up. An ape is any member of the taxonomic superfamily Hominoidea. That includes us. We were first classified as apes by a Christian creationist who lived a century before Darwin and had never heard of evolution. And now, modern genetics confirms that he was right, that we are in fact apes, not just according to all of our biological characteristics, but even right down to our ape DNA.
Isn't that the definition of Satanism?
Yeah.
Like to believe that like Earth is the kingdom, kind of?
Yes, and that is what these people were pushing.
I think that Candace heard this question and thought, here's a topic I don't know anything at all about, so I will talk out of my ass, professing like I was an expert. But no. Evolutionary scientists are not pushing Satanism, and that is not the definition of Satanism either. The Church of Satan, founded by Anton LaVey in 1966, defines Satanism as a religion that focuses on the individual and rational inquiry, and that views Satan as a symbol of pride, liberty, and individualism. The Satanic Temple defines Satanism as a rejection of superstition and supernaturalism in favor of reason and science. TST members do not believe in Satan or the devil, but they use Satan as a symbol to represent the idea of rebelling against authority. So, Candace, when you don't know what you're talking about, you could just look it up.
And so once you start to realize that Satanism is real, that these people who created everything that we view in Western society to be real believed in Satan, right? They know God's real, and yet they're convincing everyone that God isn't.
It is so sad that we live in the age of information, but you don't look anything up. You just assume that you already know all of these details about things you've never even studied. You could at least check the fact page for the Church of Satan and see where it says, "Why do Satanists worship the devil?" Answer, we don't. Satanists are atheists. Satan, to us, is a symbol of pride, liberty, and individualism, and it serves as an external, metaphorical projection of our highest personal potential. We do not believe in Satan as a being or person. To put that another way, Satan is only a symbolic character, much like Uncle Sam was around World War II. Then the fact page for the Satanic Temple says, "Do you worship Satan?" Answer, no. Nor do we believe in the existence of Satan or the supernatural. The Satanic Temple believes that religion can and should be divorced from superstition. As such, we do not promote a belief in a personal Satan. To embrace the name Satan is to embrace rational inquiry removed from supernaturalism and archaic tradition-based superstitions. Satanists should actively work to hone critical thinking and exercise reasonable agnosticism in all things. Our beliefs must be malleable to the best current scientific understandings of the material world, never the reverse. I feel safe in assuming that I know more about Satanism than Candace does. I don't have a position in either church, but I have attended a few of their ritual gatherings, including both SatanCons. And I was the keynote speaker at the first one, if that counts for anything. And while Satanism offers some aspects of religion that appeal to some people, like community, unity, and all of that, that doesn't matter to me. I joined the Satanic Temple for purely political reasons. I just wanted to show public support for their defense of the First Amendment, because it takes atheists to defend our freedom of religion against Christian nationalists who are always trying to deprive us all of that right. In any case, you were wrong, Candace. Satanists do not know that God is real. In fact, a lot of us know that he is not real. I know that there is no God. I know that to the same degree and for the same reasons that I know there are no leprechauns. Or, as in the previous example, I know there is no God just like I know there is no Dracula. But if all of that wasn't stupid enough already, remember that Candace thinks that
these people who created everything that we view in Western society to be real believed in Satan.
Christians created an awful lot of Western society, and they believe in Satan. But that's not what she means, is it? There is another group that includes a lot of Christians that has also literally built much of our Western society, and paranoid conspiracy theorists like Candace often accuse Freemasons of being devil worshippers, when they obviously are not. But hey, if you're going to be wrong about one thing, why not be wrong about everything?
And so when you speak to people that are super rational out of school, you're like, well, the evolutionary theory makes sense. So it makes sense to you that you started as a chimpanzee. Like, that's a faith, buddy.
No, that's a falsehood. The genus Pan and the genus Homo diverged from a common ancestor about 6 million years ago. We were never chimpanzees. That's not a faith either. Faith is an unreasonable conviction that is assumed without evidence and defended against all evidence to the contrary. Science is the very opposite, being a tentative acceptance of whatever is best supported by the most reliable facts and evidence, which in this case are that both microevolution and macroevolution have been directly observed and documented both in the lab and under naturally controlled conditions in the field. Biodiversity and complexity do increase, and both occur naturally only by evolutionary means. Alleles change with increasing distinction, and this is accelerated in genetically isolated groups. Natural selection, sexual selection, and genetic drift have all been proven to have a predictable effect in guiding this variance. Significant beneficial mutations do occur and are inherited by descendant groups, and multiple independent sets of genetic markers exist to trace these lineages backward over many generations. According to both morphology and genetics, humans are a subset of apes, primates, eutherian mammals, and vertebrate deuterostome animals. Numerous radiometric isotopes and other methods have reliably corroborated the sequence of ancient periods of the geologic column that were already indicated by index fossils. And the fossil record holds thousands of transitional species, even according to the strictest definition of that word, including each of the predicted intermediates in the human evolutionary lineage. So this is an evidence-based analysis, not a faith-based belief, where you simply believe whatever you're told to believe just because you were told to believe that.
It makes sense to you. And if you say to them, like, of course you went to the moon, then you start talking about basic science, but they don't actually know. They can't talk to you about Van Allen belt. They don't know anything. It's a faith.
Some things people know only provisionally because the most reliable sources corroborate this information. My understanding of evolution, however, comes from more direct experience, both in paleontology and taxonomy, zoology. I can show what I know. I'm also an epistivist, which means that I reject faith as being the most dishonest and autodeceptive position it is possible to hold. And I find it amusing that the worst thing that religious believers ever say about rational people is when they pretend, as they do all the time, as if we are just as credulous and dishonest as they are, which they can never demonstrate and we can easily disprove. This is not faith. This is the opposite of faith.
Like they have asserted, and what's interesting, even that, going to the moon, the Bible talks about a firmament. And if the firmament in the Bible, if you look at that, you would go, okay, well, it says that as below, so above, and this is how God created it. So if the Bible is real, which I know in my heart to be true, there's no way we got past this firmament.
When you say that you know it in your heart, it means no more than you foolishly believe it, credulously, and that you can't back that up, but neither will you be reasoned with, no matter how wrong you obviously are. And the problem with the argument about the firmament is that you don't know what it is. The people who wrote the Bible had the impression that the earth was a flat disk, like the shape of clay under a seal, not a sphere, but a circle, divided into 4 quadrants, sometimes mistranslated as corners. And this disk world stood on pillars like a table so that it would not move. And all of this was submerged in a watery abyss and then covered by a giant crystal dome, which is what the firmament is. And it's described as a solid, being strong as a molten looking glass. Fountains would allow water in from below the firmament, and windows in the expanse of it would allow rain in also. This was a common belief at that time from the Near East throughout the Far East, but it was still wrong. And notice how Candace believes that it is impossible for our rockets to go through the firmament to get to the moon. So she believes in the solid dome of the sky. Is she also a flat earther? Because that is a flat earth belief. It doesn't work on a globe. And she doesn't understand how the Bible says that the sun and the moon and all the stars are, well, we're all supposed to be contained within the expanse of this massive dome. So you have the flat disk, and then the dome, and the stars and the moon and everything, all of that is inside that dome. Okay? So, no barrier for rockets to get there. But when they get there, they're going to find that the moon is really, really tiny. Of course, that's not what happened. So she got the science all wrong, and she got the Bible wrong, too. And the way that she got both of these wrong shows that she is even stupider than I thought she possibly could be.
But it's interesting because, once you start to realize that all of it is about countering everything that is in the Bible, right? You have a creator. No. Evolutionary theory is real, actually.
Evolution is real, actually, and we can prove that. The goal is not to counter the Bible. The truth is what the facts are, and the fact is that the fables in the Bible are wrong on all the points that I just mentioned. Reality contradicts the Bible. So it's not just science versus faith. It's literally fact versus fantasy, truth versus lies.
What happened was a meteor hit, and I don't know, like the meteor hit and wiped out the dinosaurs, but then like the lizards came.
No. Lizards appear in the fossil record 240 million years ago in the Middle Triassic, right about the same time as the first dinosaurs.
I don't even really, when you get down to even just thinking about that, you're like, okay, so it wiped out the dinosaurs. And then what happened? They're like, well, then the amoeba was around, but then like little lizards are from that.
The amoeba, meaning unicellular microbes, evolved more than 1 billion years ago, long before any sort of animal, much less lizards or dinosaurs.
That I actually don't have a lot of questions. I wish I was in 6th grade again.
When I was in 6th grade, I understood more than Candace does now. And that is not even an exaggeration.
Because they tell us all this stuff, like dinosaurs are like when you're in 2nd grade, and guys are like, yeah. Guys are the hardest about the dinosaurs. They are dinosaur stands.
I love dinosaurs growing up.
I know. Boys love it. It's like a culture. So when I said this on my show, I was like, dinosaurs are fake and gay. My producer, all the boys were like, no, you've taken it too far. I will quit this show. It was really funny. I was like, oh, it's so sweet. You guys love your dinosaur still. And my son loves his dinosaur. But it is interesting that like they kind of drop it after 2nd grade. Like they take you to the Natural History Museum and then there's no more talk about dinosaurs like later on in school.
That didn't happen with me, nor my son either. We were still dinosaur freaks throughout both of our childhoods. I still am, though I am more interested in Permian therapsids that lived before the dinosaurs.
And they understand that children's minds are malleable. But when you get older, you might ask some questions. Like I would have a lot of questions now if I was sitting in 2nd grade and they were like in a great big meteor hit and then all the dinosaurs went away. I would be like, oh, okay, but then what happened? Then what happened? Then what happened?
Listen to the way she repeats her question. This is not someone who wants to learn anything. She's not asking to get answers. Instead, she's looking to find a weakness, and she will ignore every answer until she finds something that person doesn't know. I've met plenty of creationists who think that if there's anything scientists haven't yet figured out, then we could just chuck it all out and pretend as if the scientists don't really know anything, when actually it's the creationist who doesn't know anything. They just want to say that the scientists don't know what they do, so that believers can pretend that they know what they don't. That's not just stupid, that's dishonest too. Sadly, however, it's not just that we live in an idiocracy where most of the people are so stupid it's scary, but they're liars too. Pretending to know things you don't know is what faith is all about. So these people will tell any lie they like without ever confirming it first, and they'll never correct it either, not even after it has been conclusively and publicly disproved. They'll just double down on every lie and never admit the truth, even when they know that everyone knows better. They'll just keep on telling the same lie.
And I don't think that we...
Do you think that's the higher-ups' attempt to maybe get us used to the idea of a mass extinction event?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. And it very much empowers the fear that people have in like climate change and, well, this could happen again, or if we don't get this right. And ultimately, what are they doing? Drawing you more towards the idea that a creator is not real, but ultimate governance is real. So you have to make sacrifices. Don't think about God being real. If you want to stay alive, what are you going to sacrifice to government? Okay, well, you can't use oil. I mean, you can't use gasoline and petrol. You're going to have to drive electric cars, you know? Well, we've got to reduce the temperature by this and by that. And you see that is a religion.
This is one of the reasons that I say that Christianity is all about denying not just reality, but responsibility too. There are more than 8 billion of us now, and we're blasting through resources that could and should otherwise last for generations. But believers will not be responsible or accountable for anything. They just make up whatever excuses for how nothing really matters and that they can keep on doing whatever they want, no matter the consequences to future generations.
And these people will call themselves atheists. And I'm like, you guys have a deeper faith than anything I've ever known.
Once again, evidence-based analysis is not faith-based belief. Quit projecting your own faults onto us and pretending as if we are just as bad as you are.
These people, when the government says mask up, save lives, let your parents die alone, they listen. They listen and they laugh at the Catholics.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you believe in the sacraments. I'm like, homie, okay, you believe in things that are so utterly absurd. I mean, during COVID, if the government had said, hop on one foot, that's the only way you're going to stay alive, you would have seen mofos. Like,
of course, like everything else Candace has said so far, none of that is true. It's such a stupid lie, and for such a stupid reason that it doesn't even warrant a rebuttal.
I mean, the 6 feet thing was really funny.
of course, like common sense, that just sounded stupid.
What would you know about common sense? Common sense would imply that since viruses have mass, then they also have weight. Unless otherwise disturbed or projected, they should always fall below face level at a distance of 6 feet or more. Thus, the further you stand away from someone, the less likely you are to be infected by them. That's common sense. That's what you're arguing against.
And again, it's the intuition. Can I explain why that sounds stupid in scientific terms, science, which I think has become a faith? No, I just have this intuition. I think God gives you your intuition. That's the Holy Spirit, that this is really stupid.
Yes, what you just said is really stupid. All of it. There is no God or Holy Spirit. Not only is there no evidence for either of these things, there is substantial evidence against both of them. And you don't have intuition either. You can't explain anything in scientific terms because you don't know anything about anything, but certainly not about science. And science works exactly opposite of faith. Where faith seeks to affirm belief, to strengthen your conviction, science promotes doubt instead. Where faith asserts baseless speculation as if it was the absolute truth, and then refuses to ever admit when it's always wrong, science requires that every postulation be based on facts already in evidence, and it requires that all postulations have to be testable and potentially falsifiable, and it disallows anything from ever being declared proven in the positive sense. Exactly the opposite of faith in every respect. Quit trying to project your own greatest fault onto those who reject faith.
And yet you saw people get in line. So I believe that the cult of science, the people that deem themselves atheists, have just had this terrible thing happen where they have transferred their innate faith and they've given it to ultimate government.
No, we haven't. At least you seem to understand that faith is so dishonest and unreasonable that it's indefensible. That's why you keep lying and trying to project that fault onto those who don't and won't have faith. Science is not a cult. Quit pretending as if we are the same as you, as if we are just as bad as you are. We do not and will not share your main fault, the reason you lie. Faith is your problem, not ours.
And that's what the government's all about. They want you to believe in the government for every solution in your life and not to know that you are a spiritual being. Yeah. God is real. You have a creator. You are going to meet your creator one day.
You are not a spiritual being. There's no such thing as spirit. There's no God either. We were not created. We will never meet your magic imaginary friend. All of that is just lies and nonsense. I'm on the board of directors for American Atheist 501c3. We do not trust the government. We didn't trust the government before Christian nationalists took it over to destroy it. We actually want far less government than you right-wing conservatives do, and that you're always trying to establish, and that you're creating right now. Y'all want a government that is so big that it gets into the most private aspects of everyone's lives and bedrooms. You're a hypocrite, Candace. Quit projecting your own faults onto us.
And humans, you are not your own God.
Finally, we agree on something. Every god ever worshipped is a magical anthropomorphic immortal. I don't have any magic powers, and I'm not immortal, which is actually a good thing, because I don't know if I want to live on this world anymore. Not now that the dishonest stupidity reigns supreme. Listening to this interview was quite disheartening. Now, if I could speak to Candace in a similar sort of venue that's what she's sitting for now, I think she would quickly realize that I can prove all of my points right now. And I think she would realize that we both already know that she is full of shit. I think she'd be smart enough to figure out that I don't suffer fools. Don't act like a slut in front of your parents. Don't act drunk in front of the cops. And don't play stupid with me. I think that if she and I were talking one-on-one, and it wasn't being recorded, so their audience wouldn't know about it, then I think she would be a lot more sensible. I think she's playing to that audience. But I also think that she is so dumb that she could not fake being smart. To the point that Alina Habba made in the beginning of this video as to whether she would rather be pretty or smart, I have to say that Candace is pretty stupid.
Candace, do you believe that Michelle Obama is trans?
That's it. I'm out.